All right, welcome to today's webinar, Disability Etiquette, presented by Disability Solutions. Just a few items before we begin. In order to reduce background noise, all participants are on mute. Keith does have a dog, and I've got lots of kids, but I think we should be good on our background noise. We'll also have an opportunity for a Q&A at the end of the presentation. We'll also provide you with our contact information if you wish to contact us directly with any questions. With all that said, let's get started. My name is Kevin McCluskey, and I am the Director of Partnership Development with Disability Solutions. On your right is Keith Meadows, the Hiring and Engagement Consultant with Disability Solutions. We're responsible for developing and managing federal, state, and local talent partners to meet the business and hiring goals of Disability Solutions employer clients. We also work closely with employers to educate them on the benefits of hiring talent with disabilities and provide them with tools to help them best engage and support potential and current employees. We've been working with Pepsi for the last 8 years and several other employers across the country, and we've been doing it very successfully. Keith also works with Synchrony and Aramark as well. So a little bit about us, as you might see in the bottom right is our logo. We are Disability Solutions at Ability Beyond. Ability Beyond is our parent company. They are a nonprofit based out of Connecticut and New York and have provided services to individuals with disabilities for over 60 years. Disability Solutions is a consulting arm. It was created about 7 years ago, and it was really put together to help employers implement successful initiatives to attract, hire, and retain talent with disabilities. Our clients across the country include Pepsi, as mentioned, CenterPoint Energy, Bank of America, Polaris, and many, many more. Our motto here at Disability Solutions is changing minds and changing lives. We like to change the minds of employers through education, success stories, and proven methods, which then results in the changing of lives of job seekers with disabilities, turning into successful employees working for our clients. So first off today, we're going to two poll questions, two quick ones to start up front. The first one is, where is your company now when it comes to disability inclusion? So we'll learn a little bit about you. I'm going to launch the poll. We're launching the poll now, so you'll see it up on your screen. Where is your company now when it comes to disability inclusion? You haven't started. Maybe you dipped your toes a little bit, but it never really got off the ground, which is very common. You've tried it, but it wasn't successful. Or maybe you're just doing great and you're here for some extra tips. So we'll give it about 30, 45 seconds to get those results in. All right, we'll give about 10 more seconds. 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, looks like we got a mixed bag here today. We got about 29% haven't started. We got just over 50%. Majority is they've dipped their toes, but it never got off the ground. Again, very common. Tried it, but wasn't successful. We got 0, and about 14% doing great, and here today for some tips. All right, good to know. I'll take those results off the board. All right, so a couple learning objectives for today. We're hoping to get a greater understanding of the disability community in general, and we're really talk about the strength of this typically untapped talent resource, and also talk to you a little bit about the wide array of disabilities and abilities out there. We're going to discuss a little bit about an overview of actual outcomes, business solutions, and best practices through case studies and discussion. Again, some of the success we've seen with the employers we are working with. It's also an opportunity to discuss perceptions and ask those uncomfortable questions about fear and stigmas and misperceptions around people with disabilities. Again, a little Q&A at the end. We'll gain an understanding of the importance of culture and how talent with disabilities fits within that culture of your workplace. And we're really hoping you leave today with a clear understanding of why hiring people with disabilities is really smart business. And we want you to increase your level of comfort in how to engage, lead, and mentor individuals with all types of disabilities in the workplace. All right, so the number 2 and final poll question today is, do you or someone you know have a disability? And I'm going to launch it now. All right, again, so poll question number 2, do you or someone you know have a disability? Yes, no, maybe you're not sure. All right. And ending the poll, share the results. This is pretty common. About a majority, look like 86% of you do have or know someone with a disability, and 14% is a no. So again, this is very typical of what we see across the country when we do these trainings. Majority of you do know someone with a disability or have a disability. So it's good to know, but we're going to educate you a little bit more. Keith is going to go ahead and tell you really what defines a disability. Keith?
Thank you, Kevin. So what is a disability? If we're going to talk about disabilities, it's important to define that term. And, you know, if you ask people at your business to define disability, you know, what would they say? Or what would you even say? The actual definition is very broad. If you're like most of us, you know, the folks you work with and, you know, friends and family members, they may just define disability as those physical disabilities that you can see, or maybe they'll mention a person in a wheelchair. Interesting stat that we want you to keep in mind throughout the presentation here is that of all the disabilities out there, 70% are hidden and not readily noticeable. We're talking about conditions such as ADD, ADHD, PTSD, diabetes, anxiety. Those are all considered disabilities, although most people do not think they are. We're going to walk you through a couple of different slides touching on the word disability to show you how broad that definition can actually be. We'll start with the one on your screen here, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or the ADA. It defines a covered disability as a physical or mental impairment that substantially limits one or more of major life activities. The key phrase we want you to keep in mind there is physical or mental impairment. Next on your screen, we've got a few of those hidden disabilities that we just touched on. Certainly, disability does include those you can see, but we want to expand your thinking beyond that visible disability thought process that most of us get stuck in when we think of the word disability. To highlight a few of these, we're going to showcase some folks you may recognize who had battled hidden disabilities. First, we have Tom Cruise, who actually has struggled with dyslexia and overcame dyslexia. And next is Julia Louis-Dreyfus. You'll recognize her from Seinfeld and Veep fame. She is actually a cancer survivor. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, everybody recognizes this guy, right? Really famous actor who has struggled with depression recently and has become a mental health advocate. And finally, that's a photo of me. I have almost absolutely nothing in common with these people, but what we do share is that we have hidden disabilities. I've struggled with severe asthma my whole life, and you know, if you met me, you probably wouldn't be able to tell this right off the bat unless you started challenging me to race or sprints and began chasing me for some reason. But these, you know, these are kind of forgotten disabilities, those that you can't see. I'm going to pass it back to Kevin. He's going to walk you through the right terminology to use when we talk about disabilities. Kevin?
Thank you, Keith. So as we continue to change the minds of employers, we start with a simple yet important piece on how to address a person with a disability. This is knowledge and something you can really take on right now and make a ripple effect of difference in the world. As you'll hear throughout this presentation, we prefer to use person-first language. Don't be worried if you still say some of these terms. Everyone's a little different, and it does take time to break some of those old habits. So we often are asked, how do we address a person with a disability? And some of those typical things we hear these days are the disabled, the handicapped, the cringeworthy R word that we still hear often, differently abled, special people, challenged, crippled people. All these words we believe have a little bit of a negative label associated with them. When you say there's a disabled car on the highway, it really means that car doesn't work or it's not functioning properly. So calling a person disabled is kind of saying the same thing. That's why we choose putting the person first and keeping the disability off altogether. We certainly don't want an individual defined only by their disability. Companies are taking notice too. As you can see, Keith and I do a lot of traveling and do a lot of these trainings. And we recently were at Orlando in the Disney World whole area, and we saw Epcot. At Epcot, we saw this wonderful pamphlet for guide for guests with disabilities. It just has such a nice different ring to it than disabled guide or something like that. So, you know, companies are taking notice as well. As you'll see in the bottom right, Major League Baseball, in 2019, they changed the disabled list to the injured list. And the league made this change out of concern that the term disabled for injured players falsely compared disabilities with injuries and also that inability to participate in sports. Again, really a small educational piece to get employers and people not only thinking differently, but also talking differently. This education, again, is an impact and change you could take on right now. All right, so some of the examples on the left side of your screen, they may seem like some comments or thoughts of the past, but unfortunately at Disability Solutions, we still hear these fears and stigmas today when we're talking to potential employer clients, really outside the workplace as well. Our main job is really to debunk these thoughts and concerns through education and the results we've seen hiring people with disabilities with our clients. We too often hear people with disabilities can't do our jobs, or we don't hire people with disabilities. Honestly, we hear it almost every day. Whenever open positions you have right now, I can almost guarantee you that the right person with a disability can do each and every one of them. Disability Solutions has helped hire employees with disabilities from the mailroom to the boardroom. We're talking about warehouse workers, we're talking about department managers, all the way to scientists, all with disabilities. Again, we're looking for the right talent for the right job. On your right-hand side, you'll see Stephen Hawking. Probably not a great ideal candidate for maybe a delivery driver or someone working in a warehouse. You know what? But he was a really good fit for a few other fields and very successful. Not every person with a disability is going to be that prototypical person in a wheelchair or maybe someone with autism. People with mental health illnesses aren't dangerous, as we're told by the news in Hollywood. These and the others on your screen really help perpetuate awful stereotypes about people with disabilities. Again, today we just want to challenge you to change your thinking and really take some of these tips home and help you really attract and hire people with disabilities. You, as employers, really do have the power to break them. Let's take a quick look at the opportunities within employment of people with disabilities. As of 2018, roughly 1 in every 4 Americans have some type of disabilities. 1 in 4. That makes people with disabilities the largest talent group in the United States. Not only are people with disabilities the largest talent group, they're often an untapped pool of talent. As we all know, the unemployment rate does fluctuate from time to time, and it's very high right now. But one number typically stays consistent, and that is the unemployment rate for individuals with disabilities is roughly double the unemployment rate of those without disabilities. Now, why is that? A few factors do include a lot of those fears and stigmas that employers still have around hiring people with disabilities. Job seekers with disabilities are often pigeonholed into the same entry-level jobs or face other barriers to employment, such as lack of transportation if they need it. Also, they're typically gone into part-time roles or temporary roles as well, and they can't really find that really good gainful employment, meaningful employment, which they really, really desire. Again, Disability Solutions, we work with employers to squash these fears and stigmas, and we look at the talent rather than the disability. Remember what we all just heard, the different types of disabilities from Keith? You can understand there's a diverse talent that comes with this population. The talent ranges from transitioning high school students who haven't picked up any of those unhealthy work habits yet, to baby boomers who might have aged into a disability, who have years of experience and degrees, and everyone in between. So it's also known that diverse hiring increases productivity, creativity, and also the employer's internal and external reputation. Employers are always looking for innovative ways to attract and hire from other diverse populations. Well, I got a surprise for you. There is diversity within disability. We like to say that disabilities don't discriminate. Much like the veteran population, individuals with disabilities do hit on all the diversity metrics, including African Americans, Hispanic, Asians, women, and veterans as well. Therefore, when you are hiring people with disabilities, you're also going to increase all of your diversity outreach and hiring metrics all across the board. Now let's focus on the market value associated with hiring talent with disabilities. As we all know now, right, 1 in 4 of Americans do have some type of disability. And aside from that talent value we just discussed, when you're going to tap into this talent pool, you're going to increase your business, and it's really going to launch your company into a new market of customers. Taking a look at the numbers, you can see that 20 million families out of 70 million families have at least one member of their family with a disability. That's a lot of potential new customers. People with disabilities also account for a spending power worth over $645 billion and growing. Studies also show that 87% of individuals prefer to spend money on businesses that hire people with disabilities. Not really sure what the other 13% are doing. Maybe they're just neutral. People with disabilities and family members of people with disabilities are fiercely loyal with their purchasing dollars, and they consciously select products and services over the competitor. Just ask my wife about how we support and buy all Pepsi products because we have that shared belief. I've been working with them for 8 years, and I see where their heart is. So why not have those spending dollars go directly to your company? The spending power is going to companies who foster inclusion, and the disability community is large, and they are taking notice. Turn over to you, Keith.
Thank you. So as we walk through those definitions of disability, we learned that that definition is pretty broad and it covers all different types of disabilities. Kevin walked through some, stereotypes. Certain disabilities are often also generalized, but the key takeaway is that all of these are unique individuals with different skill sets, no matter what the disability is. Now, everyone gets nervous and, how do I act around someone with a disability, or what do I say? The answer is to act normally, disability or no disability. Don't worry about feeling uncomfortable or making a mistake when your intentions are good. It's okay to say, see you later, and use the word see to someone who's blind. An example, for instance, would be, former President George W. Bush had a presidential concert when he was in office, and Stevie Wonder was the performer, and Stevie Wonder is walking towards him, and George W. Bush is just waving and smiling really big, and obviously Stevie's not going to see that, but it's okay to be uncomfortable and make mistakes. But realize that for most people with disabilities, there are two things of utmost importance. They're important to us all, but they're of utmost importance to those with disabilities, and it's independence and acceptance. We want to live as independently as possible, and we also want to be accepted by society, friends, family members, coworkers, and strangers. Now we're going to walk you through some different types of disabilities, give you some tips on etiquette, some do's, some don'ts. One common thread through all of these is that there may be some fear on your part, either because of the disability or just not knowing the right way to react. Just use these tips and just also pretend that you're talking to a family member or a friend, and that fear does disappear. Kevin, back to you.
All right, thank you. So one thinks of disabilities, they often first think of visible disabilities, when in fact, as Keith mentioned, only 30% of disabilities are visible, making 70% hidden. Another common misconception is that someone in a wheelchair represents most of this population, so much that it usually acts as a marker for parking spaces and when you talk about this specific population. However, only 8% of people with disabilities actually utilize a wheelchair. So let's take a quick look right now at some visible physical disabilities. Common examples are someone who uses a wheelchair or arm braces for mobility. Other examples are people who are deaf or hearing impaired. Deafness refers to inability to understand speech through hearing, even when the sound is amplified. Profound deafness means the person cannot hear anything at all. They are unable to detect sound, even at the highest volume possible. Another one is amputee, such as football sensation Shaquem Griffin, who plays for the Seattle Seahawks. He was born with an amniotic band syndrome, which affected his left hand and really caused his fingers on that hand not to fully develop. Again, just a few examples that represent this category, and we'll go into etiquette right here now. So the first tip is that if an individual is using a device such as that wheelchair or crutches or a walker or anything else that really helps them with mobility, you want to make sure you're not touching that device without permission. People with disabilities, again, consider these items a part of who they are. So you touching someone's wheelchair without asking is kind of the same as me going up to Keith and grabbing his jacket and walking him around. A perfect example of my father-in-law. Since I've known him, he's been in a wheelchair. He has MS. And ever since I know him, he's been in a wheelchair, and he lives in a assisted living home. And 15 years ago, I used to go up, go visit him, go to his room, and say hello, grab him by his wheelchair, take him down the hall, put him in the elevator, go down, walk into the common area and hang out with him, maybe have some pizza with the kids or whatnot. And one day I really thought, what if he doesn't want to do that? I'm just going up and grabbing him and wheeling him away because that's what my intentions are. So I started asking him, hey, Bill, do you want to go downstairs and have pizza? And he said, no, I don't. He's like, I want to go to the kitchen area, the cafeteria area, so we could visit, we can eat there, the kids can see my friends, and we can all celebrate there or hang out there. That's what he wanted to do. I never really thought about asking him what he wants to do. I just went up and assumed, because that's what I was there for, took his wheelchair without asking him, and drove away. So it's something to think about. You don't want to touch their chair. Also, when you're talking to a person with a wheelchair, you want to make sure you get down to their eye level, as you can see in that picture right there. This positioning shows respect to that individual. It really doesn't make them uncomfortable by looking up at you for a long duration of time. And again, if it's, a quick hello, anything under 30 or 45 seconds, you don't have to get down on a knee or pull up a chair, but just shows that common courtesy. And I really do challenge you to crank up your neck for about 45 seconds and let me know how that feels. So it's just a really common courtesy to get down to their eye level if possible. As with all disabilities, you really want to make sure you ask if they need help versus assuming. We'll touch on this a few times. Asking rather than assuming that they need some help. Again, our society has really conditioned us that people with disabilities need help and they need charity. Therefore, we assume that this person in a wheelchair needs help crossing the street or maybe opening the door. People with disabilities have really been through a lot, and they're very proud people. That person in a wheelchair may have spent years getting to a point where he or she can actually cross that street, and you coming up and assuming that they're helpless kind of cheapens their progress. That's why, again, if you notice someone who may possibly need help, please just simply ask them. Simply ask. Give them the opportunity to accept or really decline that help. Also, the most obvious one for businesses here is to make sure that your business is accessible for those with physical disabilities, especially using mobility devices. Make sure your wheelchair ramps are open and functioning. Again, Keith and I travel all across the country a lot, and we see ramps that are wonderfully made, brand new buildings, but they're storage boxes at the top, so they're not actually accessible. So again, make sure your automatic doors and elevators are working. If you are interviewing individuals, make sure your area is clear for those individuals that possibly might be using mobility devices. Again, just something to think about. Keeping this thought in your mind before the interviewee arrives will definitely eliminate any uncomfortable moments of moving stuff around, moving chairs around, and will eliminate any uncomfortable moments that are really uncomfortable already in that interview situation. Again, most buildings these days are built with this in mind. However, lots of older buildings are not 100% accessible for right away. So I challenge you to, again, take a look around your interview area and your building itself and make sure it's accessible for some wonderful talent coming through those doors that perhaps might be using a mobility device. Keith, I'll throw it back to you.
All right. It's usually at this point, if Kevin and I are delivering this in a live setting where we ask a couple of questions, and the first question would be, has anyone ever met a person who is completely blind? And let's say we're delivering this training to maybe 30 people. We'll see maybe one or two hands. And then we'll repeat that same question, but we'll say, has anyone ever met a person who's completely deaf? And we'll get about the same amount of hands, maybe, anywhere from 1 to 3. And so it's that real fear that comes from not knowing someone with that type of disability. So you can substitute any kind of disability in there, and usually the number is pretty low unless the person with that type of disability works with the coworkers there. But it's that fear that kind of prevents us from moving forward and having genuine interactions with individuals. Most of us are really afraid to say the wrong thing to someone with a disability. Let's take a person who is completely blind. Should you use words like look or see or watch? The answer is yes, if that's a part of your normal vocabulary, and as long as your normal vocabulary isn't offensive. That person can usually sense that you're editing your words or changing how you talk to address them, which is going to put them on the defensive. For instance, you may want to say to a blind coworker, did you see American Idol last night? And right in the middle of delivering that sentence, you catch yourself, so it becomes, did you see, and your face gets red, and you start sweating because you use the word see, and that person's blind. And, that makes the person feel uncomfortable and awkward. And it also sends the message that you don't feel comfortable with them, and you've got to watch your words around them, even though you're just trying to be respectful and make conversation, right? But this can lead to some pretty significant conversational barriers being put up because, the person with a disability knows you're not comfortable with them. Also, for all you dog lovers out there, I know this is hard, but you cannot pet or distract a guide dog. The obvious reason is that the person with the disability relies heavily on that dog, so distracting the animal can potentially lead that person into some very dangerous situations. Kids and people like me who have 2 dogs don't understand this sometimes and just want to love the animal, but just make sure that you let them know that the dog is working and doing a really important job. And also kind of a common theme, across disabilities that we see is that once people see or notice that someone has a disability, they tend to talk really slow and loud for some reason. And, just because someone is blind doesn't mean that they have a cognitive impairment that would require you to speak like that. Is that possible? It certainly is, but assuming that you need to talk slowly and loudly for all people with disabilities is just very disrespectful. But you'd be amazed how many people think you need to talk to all people with disabilities like that. Treat us like you would any other person, and then just adjust your communication style as needed, and don't go in with those assumptions. All right. Etiquette for those who are deaf. We'll start with proper terminology to use and some statistics. Deaf and hard of hearing are the preferred terms by the community. You might hear hearing impaired thrown about there, but it's common, but that is not a preferred term by the community. About 15% of all adults over the age of 18, so some 38 million people, report some sort of hearing loss. That shoe doesn't fit every person or situation. People have varying degrees of hearing loss, and not everyone is going to require the same communication method. The number one tip here is to react to the individual normally and adjust, and then when in doubt, ask that individual. That person may be able to hear everything you say, and you may just need to speak a little bit louder. They may be able to read your lips as you speak, or they may use a sign language interpreter, or they may prefer written communication. Most hard of hearing individuals will let you know this in advance or right away since they live it every day. However, when in doubt, simply ask. Another important tip here is when you're interacting with an individual who is deaf and using a sign language interpreter, is to make sure and maintain eye contact with the individual who is deaf and not the interpreter. And this really goes against everything we've kind of been programmed to do in society, right? You're supposed to maintain eye contact with those who are talking to you. The interpreter will be the one talking, but it's going to be the words of the individual who is deaf. And so please make sure to maintain eye contact with that person. It's a huge sign of respect that you can give them. Next up, we have developmental disabilities. Developmental disabilities are a group of conditions that result in impairment in physical, learning, language, or behavior areas. They impact day-to-day functioning, and they usually last throughout a person's lifetime. Roughly 6 million Americans have a developmental disability. An example of a developmental disability includes Down syndrome. To the right, you can see actress Jamie Brewer, whose talent has landed her multiple TV and movie roles. She has Down syndrome, and just another example of how people with disabilities can achieve the highest levels of a career just like anybody else. And another example of a developmental disability you may be familiar with is cerebral palsy, also known as CP. It affects normal movement in different parts of the body, different degrees of severity. About 2/3 of the individuals with CP can walk, and some use mobility devices. So the proper etiquette, a great rule of thumb here is to speak and interact normally and then react to the individual. So if a person has an intellectual disability or a developmental disability that is noticeable, maybe Down syndrome, you mentioned many times people will just automatically react by just talking slowly and loudly, and they just assume that that's what's needed. Maybe it is, but maybe it isn't. And, assuming that for every single person up front is just a way that you could potentially insult everyone that you interact with. So we encourage you to adapt your conversation to the individual. So you can just start talking normally, just like you would with anyone else. And then you're going to pick up on vocal cues. You're going to pick up on body language cues. And if talking slower and louder is needed, then you can certainly do so and just adjust. Also, don't assume that they're not capable. We see this all of the time with, job interviews. People with disabilities, especially noticeable disabilities, are often counted out before they're even given a chance to begin the interview. We like to think this doesn't happen, but to be very real with you, it happens all the time. Books get judged by the cover, and we just encourage you to make it a point to give everyone a fair shot and just not make those loaded assumptions. We also see this in interviews with a person with a cognitive disability. So depending on that disability, a job seeker may be a bit slower to answer interview questions. There might be a slight delay of maybe a few seconds longer than average. Oftentimes the interviewer, thinking that he or she hasn't been heard, they repeat that question, sometimes impatiently. And for someone with this type of disability, it can really throw off their thinking and their thought process, and it sends that interviewer into a downward spiral where if that interviewer just waited a few seconds longer, it could have been a great interview. Finally, treat each person age appropriately. This one boils down to being yourself and talking normally and adapting to the conversation, but also coming up to a 50-year-old man or woman and talking to them as if they were a 4-year-old child, I can assure you will not get you in their good graces. Kevin, I'll throw it back to you.
All right, thank you, Keith. We'll touch on a little bit of autism spectrum disorder, ASD. It's a developmental disability that can cause significant social, communication, and behavioral challenges. Often nothing about how people with ASD look that sets them apart from other people, but with ASD, they may communicate, interact, behave, and learn in different ways for most people. The learning, thinking, and problem-solving abilities of people with ASD can really range from gifted to severely challenged, therefore the spectrum. Some people with ASD need a lot of help in their daily lives. Others need less. Others need none at all. And every case of autism is different. They can hear you speak about them. So again, some of those tips on etiquette that Keith just talked about. Communication could be difficult for most. They can expect some unexpected, blunt statements or comments. I used to work with high school students who had Asperger's, and there's one gentleman who just straight out told me, hey, you have hairy arms. And very true, it's a fact, but he would just say it every day and let me know. It was something that he was kind of obsessed with, and looked at my arm and said, hey, you got hairy arms? And I said, thank you, and I cried in the bathroom. No, just kidding. Also, you can expect some limited eye contact. When Keith and I work with job seekers who have ASD, we coach them on me, looking at the eyebrows, looking at the forehead in interviews, so it kind of looks like they're making that eye contact. It could be very difficult for some. You might expect in some of the severe, maybe some of that atypical behavior, such as hand flapping or rocking, typically used as coping mechanisms for them, or a way to just communicate how they're feeling. You definitely want to try to ignore. You definitely don't stare. Do not touch for that warning as well. On your right-hand side, you got Dan Aykroyd, comedian and actor. He opened up roughly around 2004 about his Asperger syndrome. And another thing about people on the ASD, who have ASD, they really get focused, hyper-focused on different subjects. For example, Dan Aykroyd here, he got really, really interested in ghosts and detective work, which helped him, one, make Ghostbusters and with the Blues Brothers as well. So he got really, really, really focused on that. He did lots of research, and his brain just really focused on that, and he learned a lot. And it really helped him. He credited a lot his Asperger's to helping him make both of those movies. It's a very interesting fact there. Keith, back to you.
All right, thank you, Kevin. So hidden disabilities. We told you earlier that 70% of all disabilities are hidden. What this means is oftentimes you're going to have absolutely no idea that this person has a disability. They could be your best friend, a coworker, somebody you pass on the street. Mental illnesses are included in those hidden disabilities, and it's the only disability where we actually blame the person. If you think about that with mental illnesses, if somebody's struggling with depression, you might hear people say, hey, cheer up, suck it up. But can you imagine saying that or hearing that if you're walking down the street with someone who has cerebral palsy using a walker, saying those same statements, right? It's just kind of cringeworthy, but yet with mental illnesses or some of these hidden disabilities, we'll say those types of things, and we really kind of blame the person. It's something that we as a society need to shift gears on and change. A few of those examples that we walked through earlier are on your screen there, that are disabilities that most people don't think are disabilities. Those are depression, anxiety, PTSD, bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder. You see Kevin Love on the right-hand side of your screen. He plays for the Cleveland Cavaliers in the NBA. He's spoken publicly about his struggles with anxiety and depression. And as recently as I think a couple of days ago, there was an article about it as well. He's become a mental health advocate, and that's great to see, folks with some fame and fortune coming out and talking about these kind of things. We want to get to some etiquette here. Many mental disorders are in that hidden disability category we told you. And, that means you're going to cross paths in your daily life with many people that have a hidden mental disability. All of us have heard the expression, geez, did you take your meds today? In some form or fashion, right? We've heard it in the workplace, in restaurants, on the street, anywhere. It's become another way of saying, whoa, calm down. But what we don't realize is that is one of the worst things that you could say to a person with a mental disorder. What may seem like a casual joking around comment can put a person with a mental disability on edge and make them feel uncomfortable, especially if the mental illness is hidden and undisclosed. So I can guarantee you that person is immediately asking themselves the questions, how did they know that I take meds? Do they know about my diagnosis? Are they going to tell others? Have they told everybody in the office? Does everybody know I have a disability? So I would challenge you to completely delete that phrase from your vocabulary. There are probably 1,000 different ways that you could probably get those same sentiments across. So I'd encourage you to find one of those. Also, the golden rule works here as it does everywhere else. Treat everyone the way you would like to be treated, regardless of whether they have a disability or not. Back to you, Kevin, for your favorite slide.
All right, thank you, Keith. Yes, so Tom Cruise is my favorite actor. Just if you haven't noticed it yet, there's 2 slides in here. I'm contractually obligated to have him in my slides. All right, so another subcategory of hidden disabilities is learning disabilities. Learning disabilities are neurologically based processing problems. These processing problems can interfere with learning some basic skills such as reading, writing, and/or math. They can also interfere with higher level skills such as organization, time planning, long and short-term memory, and attention as well. So learning disabilities do not go away. The brain basically still works, but differently as an adult. Many people with learning disabilities have learned many new skills and ways of getting around those difficulties. They also find a career where they could use those strengths and get around their difficulties to be very successful. Tom Cruise trained himself to focus his attention and became a very visual learner. And he learned how to create mental images in his head in order to comprehend what he just read. So again, dyslexia, I kind of compare it to when you're on a beach reading a book and you read a couple of pages and you kind of dazed off. You're like, I don't know what I just read, so you have to go back and reread them. That's kind of like what dyslexia is. Tom Cruise has that, and he obviously became a very successful actor. And what he did as a young actor, he would go into cold calls with casting directors, and they would hand him a script and say, read it. He wouldn't be able to just read the script and comprehend that all that information in it and do it justice. So what he does as a young actor, he would ask the casting director a lot of different questions. So, like what happened in the scene prior, what's the relationship with this character, what's going to happen after, all these different questions to grab some intel on that scene. And he would actually use that to ad-lib some of the lines and really eventually impress those casting directors. To this day, he still has scripts read out loud to him. He does a lot of rewriting on his movies. So he uses an assistant and some other resources to really help him overcome dyslexia, again, to be successful. Again, very common with people with disabilities. They struggle with many different things, but they have to overcome it and really think differently and able to be successful in their employment. All right, so medical disabilities are usually acquired during your lifetime, not something typically you're born with. And contrary to what most people think, you can acquire a disability in life even if you didn't have one before. A few common examples are traumatic brain injuries, known as TBIs, strokes, and a few other that surprise people are diabetes, and if you had cancer or you're a cancer survivor. Two-time Oscar winner Tom Hanks here announced in 2013 that he has type 2 diabetes. And if you know someone with diabetes, definitely understand they are dependent on insulin shots at different times throughout the day, and can also experience episodes that really do affect their daily lives from time to time. Hidden disabilities, medical disabilities, this is a group that you can join at any time. Keith usually likes to say this stat. It's kind of gruesome, but it's true. So every person on this training is more likely to acquire some type of disability by the age of 65 than they are to pass away by that age. So very interesting fact. Again, you could age into disabilities. We're seeing that a lot now with the baby boomers, aging into disabilities and needing to find new careers or really new accommodations that help them be successful at the jobs they're at now. So we're seeing a lot of increase in baby boomers across the board. All right, so let's take a look at accommodations. If a person with disability needs an accommodation, the key word we want you to always remember is the word before, which is reasonable. Most reasonable accommodations are going to be under $500, with some having no costs whatsoever. Sometimes you have a veteran who has PTSD who just needs a shift so he can able to see the exits. Some people with PTSD don't like their backs to the doors or anything like that. So a simple shift, moving his or her desk so they can see those exits, that's accommodation and costs you nothing. A couple of additional examples on the slide you can see. Again, oftentimes if a person needs an accommodation, for example, let's take an employee who is blind or visually impaired. There's a wonderful computer program called JAWS that basically reads everything out loud on the screen to the individual. The individual typically could be working with a community-based organization like vocational rehab or Goodwill. And in many cases, that community organization will be able to help the employer pay for that software and accommodation materials to really get that individual up and running within your company. Again, the key here is really not to be intimidated by the word accommodations. That's kind of the number one thing we hear about is everyone's scared of accommodating people with disabilities. When we see most of the people, again, we've hired over over 2,500 individuals with our companies, and we probably had a handful of individuals who needed accommodation. Again, some working with community-based organizations that can help assist in those, really researching, finding out great accommodations, and also funding some of those costs if necessary. Ultimately, we want to make sure that you are finding the right person for the job. Again, don't select a person for the job simply because they have a disability and you want to do a good thing. We've seen this before. People start a disability initiative and they hire someone on with a disability because they want to do the right thing and they want to support a program, and it's not the right person for the job. And it kind of, it's not good for the employee who's hired. It's not good for the HR team. It's not good for the manager. It's not good for the coworkers as well. So it's not a really great experience. So again, you want to hire the right person for your business needs, and that person so happens to have a disability if they're qualified. Again, hiring someone who is unqualified or can't do the job, so I'm going to frustrate you and your team and also the employees as well. All right, so inclusion does work. We've seen it. Study after study has shown that companies with diverse workforce, again, tend to get better results. So hiring those with disabilities is a key piece of this puzzle. And it's funny, we also see, we do a lot of research. When we start working with employers, we do what we call discovery work. And we'll go on their website and we'll see this wonderful CEO pledge to diversity and all these wonderful diversity groups, and there's one missing. Typically, it is people with disabilities are typically left out of those pledges. So you want to make sure that's included in your outreach and diversity program. Most HR and TA people dread, again, hearing that word accommodation. So we want to make sure, don't forget that word, reasonable accommodation. And what we like to do with our employers is really help with natural supports. And they're really critical to your company for those with disabilities and really for those without. A great example of natural supports is a mentorship program for all new employees. Everybody's been that new person on the job before, and having someone to talk to and bounce off some questions or ideas that can help to lead to some unnecessary turnover. Other great natural supports are simple check-ins, additional trainings or refreshers if needed, and also really creating an employer resource group or an ERG Very important. And that ERG should do some great work in the community as well. But also, a lot of ERGs struggle to work with new employees who have disabilities and also work for attracting and recruiting people with disabilities. So that's what we've seen across the last couple of years is ERGs really focusing on going to job fairs, going to career fairs, and being a part of that new hire process and recruiting process. Very important. So if you have one, try to check that out and reissue your mission statement. And we've seen, again, employers do best time in supporting their employees. They do tend to keep that talent in the door and helping those employees grow. Sorry. And again, working with Pepsi, we've seen that they hire warehouse workers, and sometimes it's really hard to get a good warehouse worker. The metrics are strong, the days are long, so it's really hard to find that specific a great fit for that specific role. So what we've seen early on is some individuals might be struggling, but you see them keep on increasing their metrics. They're not there, but they're close. If you see someone like that, just give them an extra training or an extra support, disability or no disability, and you're going to see some great outcomes. Perfect example is Burnsville, Minnesota. We had a warehouse worker who, again, really struggled. He had a learning disability. He was fresh out of high school. Wonderful person, wonderful interview, one of the best interviews they've had, they said. Just a great individual. And did struggle a little bit early on. He was learning the forklift. He was learning the whole new technology that they were working with, and kept on making progress, but wasn't hitting their typical metrics. So they actually looked at their whole metric system and said, hey, we're seeing people come, let's say 10 points short, and there's a 30% are coming 10% short, but we're seeing 20% of those individuals are going to hit it eventually. So they just extended that a little bit more. Instead of a 30, 45, 60, they did like a 60, 75, 90, and they were able to see that the individual be successful and other individuals be successful as well. So again, that extra support, kind of what I like to say is you find ways to include them rather than disclude them. Again, you want to find the right talent for your business, so very helpful. So make sure, again, you're hiring the right person for the job, and that person might happen to have a disability. All right, I'm going to skip this slide. We'll do questions in a second, but a really quick review. 1 to 4 of Americans have some type of disability, as we know now. Disability limits one or more of life's major activities, and it's very broad because it's physical and mental disabilities. There are many types of disabilities out there. Everyone is different no matter the disability. Just keep that in mind. And when it comes to etiquette, we touched on a lot of things for each disability, but it all really boils down to using the golden rule: treat others as you like to be treated, and ask them if they need help rather than assume. Real quick, our next webinar is how to increase self-identification and self-disclosure. That's coming up in June, so visit our website. It's a really great one that Keith and I really enjoy doing. And with that, we have about 8 minutes, and we'll open up to Q&A. Before I do that, just want to let you know, you could, if you have any questions and don't want to answer it here, maybe you have to jump at 3, info@Disability Talent. Those questions will come to Keith and I, and we're happy to answer those for you. With all that said, again, hover over your black menu bar there, hit the Q&A button, and type in any question you want, and we'll be happy to answer it. We did get a few before when they registered. So let me pull those up. Keith, I'll send you this one first, and I'll jump in too. We had a bad experience with someone who had a disability. How do I get my staff to get over that? So this is very common. Again, we do experience stigma, and we ask questions. Have you ever had this? Have you ever had someone with a disability? And also, of course, you hear those horror stories first. So, Keith, go ahead.
Thank you. Yeah, great question. So I would say, training is critically important too. For all your hiring managers, your decision makers, folks in the office, because we've seen this also. When we hire people with disabilities, we don't want you to kind of create a job for them, right? That's called job carving, and there's certainly a place for that, but at Disability Solutions, we like to focus on what we like to call win-win employment, which is competitive employment. So the person you're going to hire is going to be meeting the qualifications and being able to perform those essential job functions. And it just may so happen that they have a disability. And that's a much better way to kind of go around it, about it, is what we see is some of these bad experiences that do pop up stem sometimes from these job carved positions. You give a small part of a small job or a job to a person with a disability. And what happens is, the other coworkers start to get some bubbled up resentment. Why does this person get to do only a few things and I have to do, 100, right? And that kind of bubbles to the surface, and before you know it, the attitude is soured on all people with disabilities, right? So kind of to nip that in the bud would be to get some training, and then also make sure that you're hiring folks for competitive employment positions, and you're not just giving kind of token jobs to people with disabilities.
Excellent. Thanks, Keith. One question just popped up. Will this presentation be available? Yes, we do. We will send it out to you, a link and recording to this recording. We don't send the PowerPoint out because we do change it and update it a little bit once in a while, and it's a little bit of our property as well. So we will send you a link to this video that you could save and access at any time. Great. Next question is, how can I find more people with disabilities to hire and recruit? I'll take this one, Keith, if you don't mind. So it's a little bit of what Disability Solutions does for our clients is we provide that active outreach to community-based organizations. And community-based organizations are basically nonprofit organizations that work with job seekers with disabilities and veterans with disabilities as well. Typically, vocational rehab is a state or nation, a federal government agency that's sole job and purpose is to find job seekers with disabilities employment. So vocational rehab, you can look it up. They usually have an office in your location or within 10 to 15 miles if you're in a rural area. So vocational rehab is huge. Also, America Job Center, so your local workforce office. They usually have a veteran group that works with people with disabilities and someone who works with disabilities as well. And with Disability Solutions, so for example, in Phoenix, we have a few clients that we work with in Phoenix, and we push out to about 100 plus individuals that work with job seekers with disabilities. And that's pretty common across the country in those larger cities. The smaller, it's more of like, it could be anywhere from 15 to 50. But there's lots of organizations out there, from transitional high school students to colleges, to Goodwills, to the Wounded Warrior Project, your local Veterans Affairs also has an employment program to help veterans with disabilities find employment. So we say to start that outreach, we typically start with vocational rehab and build on that list to find some really good, qualified candidates for your roles. Keith, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I would just emphasize, getting active in the community, and that's, kind of a difficult statement, right, given the world that we find ourselves in, but you can still do that digitally. I know Kevin and I use LinkedIn pretty religiously, and we can find great contacts on there, but you want to find a, handful of community organizations that you can partner up with, some of the ones that Kevin mentioned, and just get that conversation going. And, it really ends up being a relationship where, they can refer you folks with disabilities, and then you can attend some of their events and help folks with resume workshops and things of that nature too. So it's a great thing to kind of get the ball rolling on.
Excellent. Next one, how can I get more people to self-identify? Always a common question. You'll have to wait until you see our webinar in June. No, I'm just kidding. So how to get more people to self-identify. Keith, I'll let you jump into this one. I think it's your favorite, talking about really brand marketing, get out there, be more of an inclusive company. But go ahead, share your thoughts.
Yeah, I would say, the first and most important question is kind of centered on your culture. And not how you view your culture, but kind of how the people that work underneath you and kind of entry-level folks, how do they view your culture as a place for people with disabilities? And that usually is kind of going to give you a insight on if your self-identifications are low. So that's one area that you could focus on. ERGs, or BRGs, employee resource groups. If you have those, do you have a disability-themed resource group? If not, we would encourage you to consider that, because as Kevin mentioned, disability cuts across all diversity metrics. So, oftentimes when people think about disability hiring, they kind of think of it kind of as being its own little bucket off in the corner, right? And then you've got diversity hiring, but disability actually cuts across all of those buckets. So you can kind of serve all of your employee resource groups purposes by incorporating a disability one as well.
Great. We have time for one more. If not, after 3 o'clock, I can actually play Pepsi's video they did about, it's called You Belong Here. It was for National Employment Awareness, National Employment Awareness Month in October of last year, where they put a video together that highlighted all this wonderful employees with disabilities, with all these different types of disabilities, and really a message of You Belong Here, which encouraged people to go ahead and self-identify as a person with disability within their My Pepsi account or whatever. Really good, touching video. Again, worked with the ERG, as Keith said. They included people with disabilities in it. They had a great message. And they also put a nice internal marketing campaign around it. Pepsi's a very competitive company, so they put gift cards. If you do something like that, if you go in and do it, you're automatically into a raffle. They posted results for each site and region across the country, so there's that HR against HR competitive aspect that really increased numbers, and their numbers went up big. It's also something you're not going to see overnight, so you're going to keep on doing all the things we mentioned today and some of our other webinars to really get out there, do that self-disclosure, market your brand, include disability in your diversity pledge, and all that wonderful stuff. All right, so last one is, we touched on this a little bit, but if I hire people with disabilities, how do I handle accommodations? So again, we do a webinar. It's on our website too at disabilitytalent.org around accommodations. That's a whole nother topic itself. But as we mentioned, 70% of disabilities are hidden. And I guarantee you you definitely have people with you right now who have disabilities, and they probably don't need accommodations. You're providing accommodations to people without disabilities as well. You probably just don't realize it. So again, most people with disabilities do not need accommodation. And if they do, make sure you have a nice structured process of how that has worked. Do some research, lean on local providers if necessary, and talk to that employee if they come to you. I mean, some might age into a disability, they might need an accommodation as a current employee. So just look at that individual. They are the expert on them and their disability, and they can help you figure out the best way. And again, don't forget that word, reasonable. Reasonable accommodation. Shouldn't break the bank, shouldn't change the job. Great. I think that is the last question. We are a little over time right now, but for the rest of you on the presentation right now, I'm going to just play this video, and feel free to hang in. Oh, actually it's not working. Perfect. All right, so I apologize for that, but there is You Belong Here, Pepsi. You could Google that on YouTube. Google that and you'll find it on YouTube. Really great video. It's been honored by the OFCCP as best practices, and a really good way to increase those self-disclosures in your organization. So with that said, we truly, really, really, really thank you for being here today in your first step, or maybe one of your steps in disability inclusion. And again, if you have any questions, please reach out to you. We'd love to help you and work with you and partner with you. With all that said, thank you and have a great rest of your day. I'll leave this up for about a minute. Thank you. All right, thank you. Ending the presentation. Have a great day.